Welcome back to another episode of Hungry for the Word. As usual, I'm your host, Tommy Vento, with the lovely Julie Vento. And our Belief mini-series continues, episode 6, um, Selah. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Um, as we did a little research for this episode, we saw that there isn't necessarily one agreed upon exact definition for that word. There's a handful of them which we'll read off to you here shortly, but one of my favorite translations of it comes from the Passion Translation, which I'm sure they got it from somewhere as well. But it reads, "Pause in His presence," and
Mhm.
that is the subtitle, if you will, for today's episode. The word Selah in that context so that we are reminded to pause much and often and many times for long periods of time. But if you don't mind reading off that kind of amalgamation of definitions of that word for us, that'll, I think, be a good place for us to start.
It's the AI overview that you
There.
get in Google. It appears 74 times in the Bible, and exact meaning and origins are unknown, but some possible interpretations are it's a musical mark. Selah may be to a musical director or an instruction to stop and listen.
Mm,
It's a musical interlude, may indicate there should be a musical interlude in this at that point.
hmm
It may also underline the text in preparation for the next paragraph.
hmm
It could be a blessing, traditionally interpreted as a blessing that means forever.
mm,
It's a call to stop and listen in Hebrew prayer and song. It's often at the beginning of a passage to signal to the reader to stop and listen before moving on.
mm. Yeah. And again, that litany of definitions all points at the same thing. I think that's one of my favorite things about the English language, although it can be frustrating at times that we use the same word in multiple ways. I love the freedom it gives one as a speaker, as a writer, and when I think of the very creative and artistic side of our father, I think of how much he loves English for its ability to be multiple meanings onto a single word. And um, even the Hebrew word Selah, Sela, missing the H, means rock. And the H, the hey in Hebrew, is like the breath of God. So you could say it's just like a rock that has been given life, or you take a breath and acknowledge the rock, the Father. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
the list really goes on, but where this kind of started for me is in Psalm 46 verse 10, where often the way that I like to read the Bible is I leave a pen in my Bible almost at all times because I love underlining and circling, making notes to myself. But I'll first open to where I last had my pen. And usually in that section or those pages, it'll either be what we're talking about or kind of the first inkling of the thread that we're pulling today to lead me somewhere else. And also often I'll just sort of flip open the Bible and trust on some level that within a few pages of where I've opened to, there's something he wants to talk to me about. Because again, the everything is everything. The whole thing is good for instruction, for teaching, for connection. And I had kind of flipped open to the Psalms and was just breezing through a few pages, and it really paused and caught my eye on this page that uh, for context, in the rest of Psalm 46, he's uh, it's actually of the Korahites, it says. So back in Moses's time, Cora was one of the people who were there, and he directed this, kind of wrote the musical number, but he lived and experienced the Exodus. And so he's singing a song of God's defense of his city and his people. And verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." And I think it's interesting that that comes almost at the end of the song, when it kind of sets the precedence of the rest of the song. But I think that's a testament of God meeting us where we're at. That oftentimes in the midst of battle, in the heat of the trial, when the enemy is at the gate, your first instinct then isn't to be still. It's to respond. It's to take action. It's to do something. Oftentimes it's to defend ourselves. And so after spending the first 9 verses reminding us who God is, he then tells us to be still. And so my background on my phone right now is this picture that I found somewhere on the internet, and it's this little stick figure sitting on top of a wave, and you can tell the sea is crazy, and the words kind of worked into the waves say, "Stop trying to calm the storm. Calm yourself. The storm will pass." And I think that's ultimately what Selah means to me. It's this
Mm,
reminder as I read the word, but as I live life, to pause in his presence and stop trying to calm the storm. Stop trying to fix things. Stop trying to control and respond, react to the world around me and my situation by making it something different, but rather to pause and to be made different myself by sitting in his presence, to
mm,
have his peace wash over me, to let the, I forget where it says it. One of Paul's instructions is let the peace of the anointed one guard your heart always, or guide you in some translations. And so it's just this really good reminder for me. I don't have to think about breathing. I constantly breathe. My body does it for me. And yet there are times where I need to consciously take some deeper breaths to reset, to reinvigorate my body, get some oxygen in my lungs and in my muscles. Maybe I've just worked out. Maybe I didn't notice I'm clenching. Maybe I'm just waking up. And this idea of taking a breath, taking the breath of God, if you will, that, hey, and pausing in that moment to let myself be reset, not to go get his peace, but to pause and acknowledge that I am now one with his peace, and to let that rule in my heart and mind. Does that all make sense?
mhm. And it's a good reminder. I think it's throughout the Bible, but be still, um, or shalom. That
Mm-hmm.
we we've talked a lot about belief and how it's an inside job, and it's a heart position. And if it's just the kind of the way of this walk is, if you can still yourself in the situation with him, connected
Mm-hmm.
to him, then you can just hear better. You
Yeah,
can, you can understand, you can start to see differently. Um, the light comes, if you will.
right. It's funny that as you were saying that, the Hebrews 11:6 popped into my head. And I only know that address because we were talking about maybe using it. But right as you said that, I'm reminded, faith, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And, we've said belief is his love language. Faith is, if you call on him, if you have hope in him, if you believe, if you have faith, you're acknowledging on some layer of your being that he is real. And while I know God is not like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, either in mannerisms or ability, there's this hypertension of the belief in it gives power to it. And in that same way, having faith in God is the only way to please him. And pausing in his presence is the only way to be in his presence on some level. You know,
Mm.
I know in my own experience that when I'm all worked up, when I'm really angry or really scared or, any of those pretty much, I'll say extreme or even moderate negative emotions, the water is very stirred. I can't really hear much reason. I can't really hear much, period. I struggle mightily to not focus on the negative emotion. And there's a verse in Exodus 14:14. What a great location. Um, where, like I said in one of the previous episodes, he was kind of bringing me back through Exodus as this type and shadow illustration of our own departure from our oppressor, our own departure from, it says right at the beginning of Exodus that the Israelites grew so great in number that the Egyptians had to set oppressors and taskmasters over them so that they didn't realize their own power. I don't think the enemy's methods have changed ever. And what better way to oppress us than to have the oppressor live right here inside our
Mhm.
own mind? And so often I would approach these storms and these situations. And I think part of the reason I'd be so stirred up is because I had this fundamental belief that I was the only one taking care of me. And so I had to be all tightly bound and I had to be on my guard and looking over my shoulder. Otherwise, I wouldn't find a solution. I couldn't have one. And this verse came, and it actually starts in 13, but this is right as they're crossing the Red Sea. And as they get through it, Pharaoh and all his horses and all his guard are sprinting through the sea after them. And Moses says to the people, which I think is amazing. This is not the Lord saying it. Again, we talked in the last episode about how Moses makes this call on the Lord's character that he didn't necessarily have to be told. And Moses says to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you shall never see again." But verse 14, "The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still." And
Mm.
I think that there's a lot of doubt in my own heart that I'm in the same standing as the Israelites, meaning the Lord loves me that much. And it's that important to him to take me out of that land and into the land he promised me. It's that important to him to accomplish his own word that I can be still and watch it happen. And I'm reminded of the new Karate Kid movie, the one with Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith, where young Jaden, the Karate Kid, says, "Wow, she's sitting there doing nothing." And Jackie Chan makes a really important distinction. He says, "No, being still and doing nothing are very different."
Mm.
And I know my own ego, when I first heard "be still," interpreted as do nothing. And at times there's truth in that. But I knew that I was kind of latching on to that from not wanting to have any responsibility more than that being the Lord's instruction to me, but that any amount of doing, if it doesn't start from being still, then it won't be exactly what the Lord wants. It won't be alongside him and you won't be able to have the testimony that it wasn't actually you. It was him the
Mm.
whole time flowing through you. And so, anyways,
Can
like I said,
I just
yeah,
gonna
I know I'm throwing a
interrupt
lot.
that? Well, be still and know, that I love the Hebrew word for that is kavah,
Okay.
Qvah,
Kavah. Yeah.
kavah. And it means to wrap yourself, entwine yourself with something.
Yes.
So, like you said, there's a difference between doing nothing and being still. What
Mm,
he's asking of us is that we learn to pause in his presence, even, wrap
mm,
ourselves in him and see what, just, and I think that's such a great learning experience as you do it a couple times, because you see that some of the decisions and the actions and the striving that you used to do as your old man, defending yourself, trying to fix it yourself, striving to, take
manipulating
care of,
people. Yep.
yeah,
All of it.
you start to see these old behavior patterns that aren't going to serve you anymore as you're walking with him in the kingdom.
Hmm.
And so just, and also another thing I thought of is when Moses told them to stand and see the deliverance of the Lord, that's also in Ephesians 6 at 13, after he tells us to put on the full armor of God. We live in this world, we need some protection, but when you've done all this, stand. Just
Yeah,
stand there.
exactly. And
So,
that's the irony, I we've talked about it, I think, in past episodes. There are times in your walk where you potentially resent the way that the Lord is, and that he would have you, you know, I think of Jonah. Well, if you're going to save those people anyways, why do I have to go and say anything to them? And this idea for me of, well, if you're going to deliver me anyways, what am I doing with the armor? Like, can't you just fix it? And ultimately, my understanding of the end goal at that time was different. I thought that the end goal was my deliverance in that moment. And he knows that the end goal is that you're conformed to the image of his son, who looks like one who walks around in that armor and doesn't need to use it. I love coming back to that
yeah.
teaching in Kung Fu Panda. You finish all your training and now you can have food and you're not hungry. And so what you had said is actually really a perfect transition into the next verse that I had, which that kavah, that idea of waiting, is to wrap your heart. Being still and doing nothing are different. Waiting in the Hebrew is an active word. You don't bury your head in the sand until it's done. You walk with the Lord, and sometimes that means standing still, and sometimes that means building things up and putting on the armor, all so that you can see and have your testimony be, look at how the Lord has delivered us. And
Mhm.
so Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15, for thus says the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. And, it is an upside down kingdom. It is backwards to many of the notions we have in the world, where oftentimes it looks in the world like the one who is the loudest and the biggest and the strongest and the most brutal is the one who's going to get his way. And in the kingdom, it's people like David, the runt of the litter, if you will. It's people like Jesus, born in a manger in a town that people laugh at. It's Moses in the reeds, hidden from the world, and to know that his way of saving you is to have you enter back into rest, not to work harder to fix it. It is to be quiet and still within yourself and trusting in him rather than trusting in your own ability to accomplish what's in front of you. And I know that that's something I'll say, struggled with. And I notice that my flesh still resists the most the idea that I could be totally still, that he really actually loves me that much, that he would perform his word while I simply sit still with him. If Jesus tells us, don't seek what you will eat or what you will wear or what you will drink, but seek first the kingdom because the Father knows you need all these things, then can I be still and seek first the kingdom? In the story of Mary and Martha, can I be Mary? Can I be the one who doesn't attend to all the needs of the house, which are true needs on some level, but sits instead and listens to his word and am eternally fed and given all these things as well? I again, that teaching can go on in its own right, but we'll pause again. What are you thinking?
Well, you and I've joked about this before. You know, whether you learned and come to the Lord um, in different ways. But when I first came to the Lord, I mean, some people come because they're desperate and down and out. They've kind of hit rock bottom, if you will. And, but I came and I was a little self-righteous because,
Mm.
I mean, my life was pretty good. I
Yeah,
had kind of done, pretty well.
sure.
And it's almost, I used to joke that it was probably be easier had I been down and out and kind of
Yeah,
knew
no
nothing,
question.
just because of what you're talking about. It's
Hmm.
just when you're pretty self-sufficient, it's difficult to pause
Yeah,
and understand that um, you know,
that was
he
always him.
yeah, it's always been him. It's always him. And you're that much of the beloved that he will deliver you, not because of all the things that you can do so well.
Yeah. And it's funny, Clint, I think, is the one who really teaches that well because he came from the other extreme where the fruit of his life, it was so evident he couldn't get it together
Yeah,
that he's like, yeah, sure, sounds good. I'll go your way. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And we chuckled. I think that's what Jesus meant, at least again, we'll say one of the layers of that teaching. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the rich man to enter the kingdom. Not because being rich is wicked, but because so often earthly success leads us to believe that we're the ones who caused it. And
Hmm.
we both know how intoxicating that drink can be
Hmm.
to participate in that system and feel like it is because of you. That is, I think, why I did burn out. One of the reasons I'll say, because, excuse me,
Bless you.
um, thanks. uh, I think that I had found success, or rather, success had been showered upon me in my early years. And because I thought I was the one bringing it about, I took the reins of my life into my own hand and said, now watch me really fly. And really drove myself into the dirt. And like you said, we all come to God for different reasons. And I know, and while I don't anymore look back with I'll say, embarrassment or shame, I can almost laugh at how foolish I was when I first came seeking the Lord, because I thought I was asking him, come on, come into my life and just bless it all so that I feel good again and then I'll be on my way. You know? And ultimately the prize has been knowing him, not any blessing that's come into my life since then. And that is pause in my presence. That
Mm.
is, I think, ultimately what he knows we need. And so he's okay if we enter his sanctuary first because we think we need something else. And I think about again the goodness of his character, call it the backwardsness to the world, that the Corinthians, who were behaved terribly, suing each other, sleeping with each other, temple prostitutes, really, really bad behavior. He says, all right, shower them with signs and wonders and miracles because they're clearly still so fleshly that I need to show them blessings on the fleshly level to get them in the door so that they can find the spiritual blessings, which far surpass that stuff. And I think that's why Paul says to another church, do we need to go back to the basics of raising the dead and healing the sick and performing signs and wonders? That these are just supposed to get you into the door. They are a glimpse, a shadow of the true power that the Lord has and that he has through us and with us. And again, I think to pause in his presence as we kind of wind down here, it comes back to the still water. It comes back to rest, quietness. It comes back to the fact that his peace has been given to us and he is peace and we're of him. So not only do we possess peace, we are peace. And I think as we include this in the belief series, I, for the longest time, insisted that peace needed to come to me. Peace needed to happen. It needed to be orchestrated. And only upon surrendering to what he has made me have I begun to even glimpse the depth of the peace that is on offer to us. When I really pause in those moments of being worked up to remind myself of what's already happened and that the storm will pass, calm myself, that is the actual gift he's given us more than any of the things that we think are gifts that come alongside it. To know that your experience here could be utterly shaped by peace is totally the opposite of what the world tells you is available. Not to mention the way the world tells you you'll get peace as the opposite of how the Lord instructs us to remain in peace and return to it, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Selah.
Selah. Yeah, so as we wind down here, is there anything you'd want to leave us with? What's kind of sticking out from the episode to you?
Well, I think another thing about pausing, we've talked about peace a lot, but also the pause, I think, is really important. We we live in an information age, and sometimes we think more and more and more and more information is going to be what helps us. But sometimes if you just, like we've talked about, we've kind of just paused in 3 scriptures today, right? If you could just pause in them and really just weed out, or pull out all the
Mm,
beauty of that as you just think of it and imagine yourself in it, and do some meditation. We're always meditating, we're always thinking about something. We might as well purposely meditate and think upon some of these scriptures that we talked about today, like what does the Lord delivering me look like
Mm,
in this case? What does him loving me look like? That kind
yeah,
of thing. So I'm thinking of the pause part of that as well.
agreed. Well, and another good reminder, like you said, it appears 74 times. And while I'm not certain, I think that almost all of those times are in the Psalms. And so as you read the Psalms and you see that word, maybe next time don't read it like it's just another word in there. Maybe read it as instruction to go back to that passage before and pause on it again. And when you said, pondering what does it look like for him to deliver me, to remind that waiting means to entwine your heart with him. So it's this hypertension of, yeah, you might ask, but you know in your heart and declare that his goodness is better than the solution you could come up with. And, it sounds extreme, but Jesus in the garden before the crucifixion says, Lord, if there's any way this cup can pass other than this, please let it be done. But not my will, yours be done. And I think that is the perfect illustration of be still and know that I am God. Ask your peace, stand next to me, and boldly say what you want, but know that I'm so good to you and all of humanity that the way it goes down will be for the best, for not just your heart, but for my kingdom and all those involved. And you can pause in his presence and know that of him today.
Mm,
Blessings.
blessings.